All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely mind-boggling physics and logistics of semi-submersible vessels. We're talking about the unsung heroes of global logistics, ships like the Boka Vanguard or the mighty Servant. These are the beasts that transport massive offshore oil rigs, or even damaged guided missile destroyers, right across entire oceans. It's a journey into a world of extreme engineering where the traditional rules of shipping are just completely thrown out the window.
To really grasp the scale we're dealing with here, imagine someone hands you the keys to a top-heavy, completely unwieldy structure that weighs a massive 70,000 tons. To put that in perspective, that's literally like picking up a 30-story tall floating city. And you aren't just moving it across town, right? You're tasked with dragging this behemoth, the very infrastructure that powers our daily lives, smack into the middle of a stormy, unpredictable ocean.
And you know, this perfectly illustrates the core paradox of these mega machines. Because to carry the weight of a skyscraper across the ocean, you don't just build a bigger crane. Honestly, no crane on Earth could handle that. Instead, you build a vessel designed to intentionally commit the one catastrophic act a ship is absolutely never supposed to do. You build a ship that sinks.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit 5 key areas. First, intentionally sinking a ship. Second, the physics of the lift. Third, surviving massive bending loads. Fourth, navigating treacherous oceans. And finally, the why, manufacturing optimization.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, intentionally sinking a ship, or what I like to call the logistical submarine crossover. This whole process requires overcoming Archimedes' principle and actively manipulating the ship's reserve buoyancy to purposefully submerge the deck.
To pull off this float-on, float-off method, the ship essentially acts as a giant, hollow, U-shaped tank. It opens these massive sea valves, floods its internal ballast tanks, and literally submerges its own deck up to 16 meters underwater. Once it's down there, the cargo is carefully towed into position. But here's where the real magic happens, pumping that water back out. We're talking about moving millions of gallons of water with surgical precision. And as the ship goes deeper, those pumps are fighting against rapidly increasing outside water pressure. It's a massive logistical hurdle that closely mirrors the exhaust systems of a Mark 50 torpedo or the ballast tanks on a nuclear submarine.
And guys, the stakes for getting this pumping sequence right are literally life or death. The internal plumbing of these ships is actually way more complex than any major city's water grid. If that system fails to flood perfectly evenly, it creates what's called asymmetric torque, a catastrophic rolling force. I mean, if one side floods even a fraction of a second faster than the other, that uneven weight distribution could instantly capsize the vessel before the lift even gets underway. No pressure, right?
Which brings us to Section 2, the physics of the lift, which is a seriously delicate balancing act, because getting the ship underwater is really just the prologue. The exact second the rising ship touches the underside of its cargo, it instantly transforms from a floating vessel into a solid structural foundation.
So the absolutely crucial point here is managing this terrifying shift in the physics. In aerospace, engineers are always balancing the center of gravity against the center of pressure. But out on the water, it's a cage match between the center of gravity and the center of buoyancy. The center of buoyancy is managed entirely by the submerged hull of the ship. But as that 70,000-ton rig clears the water, the combined center of gravity skyrockets way high up into the massive cargo. If that load is even slightly off-center during this transition, well, it creates an immediate deadly capsizing moment.
To survive this insane top heaviness, engineers use those giant stability columns you see at the front and back. These tall towers aren't just there to look cool or house the crew. They act exactly like the outriggers on a canoe. They vastly widen the ship's footprint in the water, providing the vital reserve buoyancy needed to keep a fully submerged, intensely top-heavy ship from just flipping completely upside down.
All right, on to Section 3, surviving massive bending loads, otherwise known as the structural integrity challenge. Because holding up a floating city isn't just a stability issue, it is a massive material science problem. See, the ship needs a perfectly flat deck to hold the cargo, which means it completely lacks a traditional structural keel.
And that flat deck design puts immense, almost unimaginable stress on the hull, leading to what engineers call longitudinal bending. Imagine the ship out on the open ocean. If the bow and the stern are being held up by 2 separate wave peaks, but the heavy middle, which remember is carrying up to 70,000 tons of oil rig, is suspended right over a trough between those waves, the ship experiences the exact same intense stress you'd see in an aircraft fuselage. Under that kind of weight, the ship basically desperately wants to snap right in half like a toothpick.
So, to ensure the ship doesn't literally break in two, shipbuilders borrow direct solutions from aerospace engineering. The hull relies on this incredibly complex grid of strengthening rings and stringers. It's actually remarkably similar to the internal structure of the space shuttle's external tank. On top of that, just like Grumman had to use specialized electron beam welding for the titanium wing box on the F-14 fighter jet, these ships utilize high-strength steel and advanced automated welding techniques. Every single seam, every joint, must flawlessly handle the sheer stress of a million-ton-meter bending moment. It's wild.
Getting the cargo safely on board and ensuring the ship doesn't snap is an incredible feat, but we're only halfway there. Let's look at Section 4, Navigating Treacherous Oceans, the Meteorological Threat. Now the crew has to actually plot a course from a shipyard, say in South Korea, all the way to the North Sea.
Out on the open ocean, that towering cargo basically becomes a giant, dangerous sail. A strong crosswind can easily cause a deadly wind-induced heel. And because these lumbering behemoths completely lack the specific excess power of, say, an F-16 fighter jet to just power their way through an incoming storm, navigation teams have to be incredibly proactive. They rely on military-grade synthetic aperture radar tracking, literally the exact same tech used to track submarines, to monitor sea states in real time. Their only real defense against a massive storm, planning weather windows months in advance and actively running to hide from extreme weather.
Which brings us, naturally, to Section 5. The why, manufacturing optimization, or the global logic of it all. After seeing the mind-boggling physical dangers, these terrifying ocean crossings, and knowing these vessels cost hundreds of millions of dollars while being an absolute nightmare to maintain, it leads us to a highly logical question.
Seriously, why on earth do we go through all this trouble and extreme risk? Why not simply build the oil rig out in the ocean, exactly where it's going to stay for the rest of its operational life? I mean, shipping it this way seems like an impossible gamble. So what makes this entire extreme endeavor actually worthwhile? The answer, fundamentally, comes down to manufacturing optimization. Just like we're seeing right now with small modular reactors in the nuclear industry, it is exponentially cheaper, faster, and honestly infinitely safer to build incredibly complex systems in highly controlled environments, like those massive high-tech shipyards in South Korea or Singapore. Heavy lift ships are the ultimate enabling technology here. They are literally the only way to make this modular global industry a reality, allowing us to deploy massive hard tech anywhere on the planet. And ultimately, that's what keeps our modern world powered and connected.
At the end of the day, as our modern world demands more data from deeper subsea cables and more energy from harsher, deeper waters, it requires us to push engineering to its absolute limits. But as incredibly complex as these 70,000-ton lifts get, success always boils down to strictly adhering to three fundamental laws: managing energy, manipulating materials, and above all, deeply respecting the laws of physics.
I'll leave you with that thought to ponder. If we can master the physics of intentionally sinking a ship just to carry a floating city across the globe, what seemingly impossible engineering leaps will we conquer next by daring to sink the very machines we rely on to float? Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today. Keep observing, keep questioning, and keep digging into how the incredible systems around us actually work. Catch you next time.